The throne room of the Zelari Empire shimmered like the inside of a living star. Its walls were made of translucent crystal that pulsed softly, as if the entire palace was breathing. Silver light spilled from high above, bending around floating petals of glowing pollen that drifted through the air like tiny spirits. The sound of slow, rhythmic humming filled the hall, the song of the queen herself, a melody that every Zelari in the room could feel inside their bones. Upon the throne sat Queen Sareth of the Ninth Bloom, ruler of 300 worlds, daughter of the endless tide. Her skin was smooth and radiant, shifting between shades of blue and violet like the surface of an opal. Her eyes were endless depths at twin galaxies swirling with starlight. Every motion she made was like a dance, every word like music. She was ancient, powerful, untouchable. Before her, surrounded by tall guards of shimmering armor, stood a single human. His name was Ilias Crane. He was not beautiful, not graceful, not carved from light as the Zelari were. His face was rough from days of exhaustion and soot, his hair dark and matted from battle. His uniform, once white and clean, was now burned, torn, and patched with emergency sealant. Yet he stood straight, his brown eyes locked on the queen, without flinching. His hands hung calmly at his sides, though they bore small tremors of pain. The silence between them was heavy, like the pause before a storm. It was said that humans rarely survived this long in Zelari space. They were fragile creatures, short-lived and painfully mortal. Yet this one, this scarred, stubborn Terran, had done something the Queen could not ignore. He had saved her fleet. When the firestorms of Telnar Prime tore across the planet's surface, melting metal and glass, Ilias had refused to retreat. He had crawled through smoke and flame, his lungs seared, his skin blistered, to reach the failing power conduits of the Queen's flagship. While Zelari officers screamed orders through psychic channels, the human simply worked, silent, sweating, dying, until the engines roared back to life and lifted the fleet from ruin. He had fallen unconscious before the Queen herself could thank him. Now, weeks later, he stood before her, summoned by royal decree. Ilias Crane of Terra, Sareth's voice rolled through the chamber like thunder softened by silk. You have earned the gratitude of the Zelari throne. You may ask for any reward you wish. Speak, human, and it shall be given. The courtiers murmured among themselves. To be granted a boon by the Queen was to hold the favor of an empire. They expected him to ask for riches or freedom or perhaps a ship of his own. Humans were predictable, they thought, always wanting, always needing. But Ilias only looked up at her, eyes steady. I want your name, he said. The air froze. The humming song that filled the hall stopped at once. The guards shifted uneasily, their metallic skin flashing in alarm. Even the light dimmed. The Queen blinked, her expression unreadable. You want my name? She asked, almost amused. Yes, Ilias replied simply, your true name. Gasps rippled through the room. A Zelari's true name was not a word, it was a piece of their soul. Only one's bonded mate was ever allowed to know it. To even ask for it was unthinkable, even offensive. The Queen rose slowly, her gown of living silk fluttering around her like a nebula. She descended from her throne, each step echoing like a heartbeat. When she stood before him, she was taller than he by half a head, her radiance painting his tired face with pale light. Do you understand what you ask, little human? She said softly. Among my kind, such words are no small thing. Our true names are our hearts. To speak them aloud is to bind our lives. I understand, Ilias said, but I still want to know. Her lips curved not with anger but with something else. Curiosity, perhaps, or mischief. And what would you do with my name should you have it? She asked. Ilias shrugged. I'd remember it. The court laughed not cruelly but with disbelief. The sound shimmered through the air like breaking glass. A human, daring to tease the Queen of the Zelari. Impossible. Sareth tilted her head, eyes narrowing as if studying a new kind of creature. Then she laughed too, her voice a melody that made the chamber tremble. "Very well," she said at last. "If you can guess my true name, Terran, I will make you my consort." The laughter of the court turned into an uproar, musical, echoing, joyous. It was absurd. No human could ever guess a Zelari name. Their names were songs, vibrations sung through the stars, impossible for human tongues. But Elias didn't laugh, he only nodded. "Deal," he said quietly. The laughter died again. His voice carried no arrogance, no foolishness, only certainty. The queen studied him, her gaze lingering on the burns that marked his neck, the steadiness of his breathing, the strange calm in his human eyes. Then, with a soft, unreadable smile, she returned to her throne. "Then let it be so," she said, voice echoing through the silver chamber. "You have until the next full orbit of our world. Guess my name, and the queen of the Zelari shall be yours." The courtiers hummed in awe, the challenge spreading like wildfire through the empire. The queen had made a joke, a beautiful, impossible jest. And yet, as Elia's crane bowed and turned to leave, she felt something strange stir in her chest, a small flicker of unease. Because when the human said deal, he had looked at her not with fear nor desire, but with understanding. And for the first time in centuries, Queen Sareth of the Ninth Bloom wondered if a human might actually make her afraid. News of the queen's joke spread across the empire within a single rotation. From the burning sands of Kareth Ix to the frozen moons of Oventh, every Zelari whisper carried the same words. The queen has promised to marry a human. To the Zelari, it was comedy. To the humans who lived under Zelari protection, it was legend waiting to be written. But to Elias Crane, it was simply a promise, and he never broke promises. He stayed aboard the Radiant Crown, the Queen's flagship, a massive living vessel whose walls pulsed like the heart of a sleeping giant. Its halls were lined with luminous vines and floating shards of crystal that sang faintly when touched. To most humans, it was terrifyingly alien. To Elias, it was fascinating. He spent his days in the lower decks, repairing the wounded ship systems and studying their strange patterns. The Zelari machines didn't use wires or metal circuits. They were grown, not built, shaped through song and thought. The engineers hummed while they worked, their voices vibrating in harmony with the living metal. And Elias listened. He listened to everything: the thrum of the engines, the slow pulse of the walls, the quiet sighs of the Queen's voice when it echoed through the comms. He couldn't understand their language completely, but he felt it. It was rhythm, emotion, meaning hidden in sound. Sometimes, when the Queen's song traveled through the halls, he would stop working and close his eyes. Her voice was low, layered with notes that no human instrument could make. It made his chest tighten in a way he couldn't explain. The Zelari crew laughed when they saw him pause. "Still chasing the Queen's name, human," they teased. "You'll go deaf before you find it." He only smiled. "Maybe," he said, "but I'll keep listening." Queen Sareth pretended not to care. From her throne on the upper deck, she ruled her empire as she always had, calm, radiant, untouchable. Yet, ever since that day in the throne room, she found herself distracted. Sometimes in the quiet hours, she would reach out with her mind, brushing the ship's thoughts. And there, among the humming currents, she could feel the small, stubborn pulse of a human heartbeat. He was always awake late, working alone, sometimes humming softly to himself. It wasn't music by Zelari standards. The notes were rough, uneven, but there was a strange warmth to it, a sense of longing, of hope. She caught herself listening more often than she should have. "You're curious," her advisor murmured one day, the faint glow of his body flickering. "About the human." "He amuses me," she replied coldly. "He's beneath you," the advisor warned. "They all are." Sareth only smiled, her eyes drifting to the stars beyond the viewfield. "Perhaps," she said softly, "but even dust can shine if the light hits it right." One evening, when the ship floated through the Veil Nebula, a sea of pink and gold light, The Queen descended to the lower decks. The Zelari crew fell silent as she passed, bowing low, their voices fading into whispers. Elias was on his knees beneath an open panel, covered in grease and glowing dust. He didn't notice her at first until her reflection appeared in the polished surface of the floor. He stood quickly, brushing off his hands. "Your Majesty." "You work late, Terran," she said. Her tone was light, but her eyes studied him carefully. "Someone has to," he said with a small grin. She tilted her head. "You do not fear me." "I've seen stars die," he replied. "You're brighter but not scarier." That made her laugh, a soft, melodic sound that filled the corridor. "You speak boldly for one so fragile." "You joke," he said, "but you bleed like anyone else. I saw it on Telnar." The Queen froze. No one dared speak of the battle, but Elias didn't stop. "When your ship fell, you stayed with your soldiers. You didn't flee. That wasn't a queen's choice, that was a person's choice. That's what I saw, that's why I stayed." Her eyes flickered for a moment, softer than the stars. "And what do you seek now, Elias Crane?" He met her gaze. "Your name." There it was again, that impossible request, spoken with quiet certainty. The Queen smiled, hiding the strange ache rising in her chest. "You cannot hear it," she said. "Our true names are songs that humans were not built to understand." Elias shrugged. "Then I'll learn to listen differently." Days turned to weeks. Every night, Elias found a quiet corner of the ship where he could sit and feel the vibrations of its living core. The Zelari engineers began to whisper that the human was going mad, that the Queen's jest had broken his mind. But he didn't care. He started to hear patterns. The hum of the engines wasn't random, it was a chorus. The ship sang with the same tone the Queen carried in her voice, faint but distinct. It was like listening to the echo of her heart. He began to understand something no human ever had, that Zelari speech was not just words but music, and behind every melody there was a name. Sometimes he would whisper the sounds he heard, letting them roll off his tongue, low, broken syllables, pieces of a song he couldn't yet complete. And when he did, he swore the air around him grew warmer, as if the ship itself was listening back. Up on her throne, Queen Sareth heard it too. She sat in silence, the starlight painting her face, and for the first time in centuries her pulse stumbled. Because through the endless noise of the ship, through the living song of her empire, she heard her own melody, faint, imperfect but real, being hummed by a human. And for the first time, she felt something that frightened her more than war or death. She felt seen. The days aboard the Radiant Crown grew long and quiet. The ship drifted through empty space between two dying suns, glowing faintly like a heartbeat in the dark. To most of the crew, the silence was unsettling. To Elias Crane, it was peace. He had stopped keeping count of time. The ship had no nights or mornings, only cycles of light and shadow as the stars turned. He worked when he was told to, slept when his body demanded it, and in the hours between he listened. The Radiant Crown was alive and he could feel it breathing. Its walls pulsed softly when he touched them. Its engines hummed with patterns too perfect to be random. The sound carried through the decks like a lullaby, deep and ancient. Sometimes, if he closed his eyes, he could almost hear words hidden in the rhythm, something vast and sorrowful. He began to think that maybe this was how the Zelari prayed. The crew treated him differently now. At first, they had laughed when he said he could hear the ship's song. But laughter had turned to whispers when small miracles started happening, engines stabilizing after years of instability, damaged systems coming alive under his hands. "He's tuned to her," one whispered. "The Queen's joke is changing him," said another. They weren't entirely wrong. Every day, Elias felt the Queen's presence more clearly, like a soft vibration in his bones, a pulse that answered his own heartbeat. When she was near, the air around him grew warmer, sharper. One evening, while repairing an energy conduit near the royal wing, he felt it again, the sudden shift in the air, the weight of her nearness. He turned and found her standing there. Queen Sarith of the Ninth Bloom, radiant as moonlight, her gown woven from living light that flowed with every breath. She didn't speak at first. She only watched him, her violet eyes flickering with something unreadable. "You never rest, do you?" she said finally. Elias wiped a streak of glowing dust from his cheek. "I'll rest when your ship stops singing." That made her smile. "You hear it still." He nodded. "All the time. It's beautiful, lonely too." Her expression softened, almost painfully so. "You are the first human to say that word lonely about one of our creations. You truly hear it." "I do," he said quietly, "and sometimes I think I hear you in it." The queen froze. For a long moment there was no sound but the low hum of the engines. Then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you know what you are hearing, human? That song is my soul, stretched through the heart of this ship. Every Zelari flagship is born from its ruler's essence. Its pulse is my own." Elias looked at the glowing wall, his eyes wide with wonder. "Then I guess I've been listening to you all along." Her heart gave a sharp, strange flutter. She had lived for centuries through wars, coronations, betrayals, and no one had ever spoken to her like that. Not her generals, not her priests, not even her lovers. No one had ever dared to sound gentle. "You should not say such things," she murmured, turning away. "They unsettle me." "I'm sorry," he said, "but I don't think I could stop if I tried." She looked back at him, eyes glowing faintly. "You are a strange creature, Elias Crane." He smiled. "So I've been told." After that night the queen visited more often. Sometimes she came with reason, to inspect repairs, to discuss strategy, but sometimes she came with none at all. They would stand side by side in the quiet corridors, staring out into the endless dark. She told him stories of her world, of the crystal oceans that sang at dawn, of the moons that bloomed with silver flowers every century. Her voice was soft when she spoke of it, her home, long lost to war. "We are born into beauty," she said, "and we die in silence. That is the curse of the Zelari." Elias looked at her, his voice steady. "Then maybe you just need someone to make noise with." Her laughter was low, surprised, and real. It echoed off the walls like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Weeks passed. The queen's advisors noticed the change. She was lighter somehow, less cold. The air in her chambers no longer carried the sharp edge of command but the warmth of something softer. "You spend too much time with the human," her high priest warned. "He is dangerous." "Dangerous," she repeated, amused. "He can barely lift a plasma rifle." "That is not what I mean. He makes you feel, and that makes you weak." But when the priest was gone, Sarith stood alone before the great window, staring into the stars, and whispered to herself, "No, it makes me remember." Down in the lower decks, Elias was hearing something new. The ship's song was changing. It wasn't just humming anymore, it was shaping itself around him, bending its rhythm to his presence. When he walked, the floors brightened beneath his steps. When he worked, systems responded before he even touched them. It was as if the ship recognized him now, accepted him. And sometimes, when he closed his eyes, he could almost see the music shimmering threads of light, woven through the air, connecting him to something vast and alive. He didn't understand it, but it didn't frighten him. It felt right. Late one cycle, as he rested against a wall of glowing crystal, he whispered softly to the ship, "If you can hear me, tell her she's not alone anymore." Far above, in her private chambers, the queen stirred from meditation, her pulse skipping without reason. For the first time in her long, lonely reign, she smiled to herself, not as a queen, but as a woman, and whispered into the dark, "I know." The peace did not last. It never did. The Zelari fleet was passing through the Veilguard Rift. a storm of fractured space where light twisted and time bent upon itself. It was a region no sane captain dared to enter, but the Queen's mission was urgent, to stop the shadow creatures known as Devourers before they consumed another world. They struck without warning. The first sign was silence. One by one, the outer patrol ships stopped transmitting. Then came the screaming, not through radios but through thought. The Devourers did not kill with weapons. They fed on minds, stripping memory and emotion until nothing human or alien remained. The radiant crown trembled as their black forms swarmed through the rift. They were like smoke made solid, shapes that flickered in and out of existence, glowing faintly with stolen light. The Zelari soldiers fought with sound and song, psychic waves that burned through space, but the Devourers multiplied faster than they could be destroyed. Panic spread through the telepathic network like fire through dry grass. Queen Sareth stood in the command hall, her hands glowing with power, her voice holding the fleet together. But even she could feel the pull, the cold emptiness clawing at the edges of her mind. "They're eating our thoughts," her first captain gasped. "They know our names." Sareth's vision blurred. The enemy was inside her head, whispering false memories. She staggered, clutching the railing, and then, through the storm, a human voice broke through the static. "I've got a way to stop it." Elias Crane burst into the command deck, his face streaked with sweat and oil, his eyes wide but unafraid. "The psionic core," he shouted. "It's failing, it's drawing them in. I can stabilize it manually." "You'll die before you reach it," the Queen snapped. "The chamber's flooded with resonance." "Then at least I'll die doing something useful." He didn't wait for permission, he ran. The psionic core was the heart of the radiant crown, a vast sphere of living light, connected directly to the Queen's soul. No one could touch it without being burned by the flood of thought it carried. When Elias entered, the air felt thick, almost alive. The song of the ship was no longer peaceful, it was screaming. He stumbled forward, shielding his face as arcs of psychic energy tore through the air. The chamber pulsed with violent light, each beat shaking his bones. He could feel the Queen's pain in it, her fear, her fury, her will to protect her people. He reached the control lattice, a twisting network of crystal tendrils that thrashed like wild roots. His hands shook as he ripped open a panel, sparks cutting into his skin. Come on," he muttered. The voice of the Queen echoed through the comlink. "Crane, get out of there, that's an order." "Can't," he gritted out. "It needs a living link, something with a mind to bridge the feedback. That connection will destroy you." He smiled faintly, though she couldn't see it. "Then you'd better make it worth it." And with that, he pressed his bare palm against the core. The world exploded in light. For a heartbeat, Elias felt everything, every voice, every thought, every cry of the dying fleet. He felt the Queen's mind like a storm of stars crashing through him, her emotions flooding his chest until he could barely breathe. Memories that weren't his tore through him, her coronation beneath the twin moons, her first battle, the moment she lost her sister to the shadows. He saw them all, lived them all, and in return she saw him. His childhood under the broken skis of Earth, the nights fixing ships in dust and silence, the moment he'd first looked up at the stars and promised himself he'd go farther than anyone else. Their souls touched for a single, shattering instant, and then the light consumed everything. On the command deck, the Queen screamed. Her song fractured as she felt the human's mind intertwine with hers. Then the radiant crown roared to life. The core stabilized, its chaotic energy transforming into a clear, piercing tone, a note so strong it rippled across the fleet. The Devourers shrieked, their forms unraveling, consumed by the resonance of pure, living harmony. The rift burned white. And then silence. The Devourers were gone, the fleet was safe. But in the quiet that followed, Sareth could no longer feel the human's mind. The connection was empty. "Elias," she whispered, reaching through the ship's song. No answer. When the engineers found him, he was collapsed beside the glowing core, his hand still pressed against it. His pulse was weak, his breathing shallow, his eyes open but unfocused, as if part of him had stayed behind in the light. The queen knelt beside him, her glowing fingers trembling as she touched his face. "You fool," she whispered, voice breaking. "You stubborn, beautiful fool." He stirred faintly, lips cracking into a weak smile. "Hey," he rasped, "told you I'd keep your ship singing." She laughed, though tears of starlight ran down her cheeks. "You did more than that," she said softly. "You sang with me." Then his eyes closed, and the chamber dimmed to silence. For the first time in 1,000 years, the queen of the Zelari bowed her head not to a god, not to a crown, but to a man. A fragile mortal human who had saved her world with nothing but courage and heart. The radiant crown drifted in silence after the battle. The great ship, once filled with the songs of the Zelari, now hummed softly like a heartbeat in mourning. Thousands of voices whispered prayers through the telepathic net, each one carrying the same ache, the sorrow of survival bought by one man's sacrifice. Elia's crane lay still in the queen's healing chamber, surrounded by shimmering tendrils of living light. His body was broken, but not lifeless. The healer said his mind was lost in the song, trapped between the physical and the psionic, caught halfway between her soul and his own. Queen Sareth sat beside him every day. She did not wear her crown, nor the flowing armor of her rank. Instead, she came as she was, pale, silent, her long hair unbound, her glow dimmed to a faint flicker. Her court didn't recognize her like this, and perhaps that was the point. She would simply sit, her hand resting over his, feeling the slow, uncertain rhythm of his pulse. "You stupid human," she murmured once when no one else was listening. "You weren't meant to carry what you did. You shouldn't have been able to." But he had. Somehow, impossibly, he had survived touching her soul. And worse, or perhaps better, he had changed her. Before, Sareth's song had been sharp and cold, a melody forged from centuries of command. Now, when she reached into the living core of her ship, she felt something else intertwined within it. A warmth, a human rhythm, quiet and steady, pulsing like a second heartbeat beneath her own. Sometimes she thought she heard him whisper there, not in words but in feeling, a presence that said, "I'm still here." Weeks passed, the fleet rebuilt, the empire celebrated its survival. Songs were written about the human who stood against the devourers, Elias the listener, they called him, the man who heard the stars. But the queen did not sing. Every day, she sat beside his motionless form, speaking softly as though her words could find him in whatever dream held him. "You once asked for my name," she said one night, voice trembling. "I thought you were foolish. No one could ever hear it, not truly. Even among my people, few have understood what it means." She leaned closer, brushing his hair back from his forehead. "A true name isn't just a sound," she whispered. "It's a soul in motion. To speak it is to know every piece of who I am. And you, Elias Crane, you came closer than anyone." She paused, looking down at him, her light flickering. Maybe too close. Then, for the first time, she did something no Zelari ruler had ever done. She began to sing to him, softly, quietly, the low tones of her heart song spilling into the chamber like waves of light. It was a lullaby of her world, of the silver oceans and glowing skies, of moonlight that never faded. It was the sound of a home she had lost long ago. And as she sang, the man's fingers twitched. He woke 3 days later. Not suddenly, but like a dawn, slow, uncertain, spreading light into dark corners of his mind. When he opened his eyes, everything was soft and gold. The first thing he saw was her face. The queen leaned forward, her expression unreadable. But her eyes were filled with light, and something that looked almost like fear. "Welcome back, Elias Crane," she whispered. His throat was dry. "You look tired." She laughed softly, and to her own surprise, tears slipped down her cheeks, bright, shimmering tears that fell like tiny stars. "You risked your life for me," she said, "for a woman who mocked you." "You weren't mocking me," he murmured, voice weak but steady. "You were lonely." She froze. No one had ever spoken to her like that. "And how would you know?" she asked, her voice barely a breath. "Because I heard it," he said, "in your song." The silence that followed was thick and fragile, like glass. Then slowly he lifted a trembling hand, reached for hers and whispered a word. It was not a human word. It was a sound, a low, melodic tone that filled the room and made the air shimmer. The queen gasped as it washed over her, every nerve in her body lighting up. It was her true name. Not the name the court used, not the title written in their archives. The one buried deep within her soul, the sound that had never been spoken aloud by anyone but herself. She stumbled back, her hand covering her mouth, her heart racing with disbelief. "How?" she whispered. "How did you know?" Elias smiled faintly, eyes half open, voice raw. "You told me," he said. "Every time you sang, every time your voice reached through the ship, I heard you, I listened." The queen stood frozen. Every instinct in her screamed that this was impossible. No human should be able to hear a Zelari's true name, let alone speak it. And yet she felt it resonate inside her perfectly. He hadn't guessed, he hadn't stolen, he had understood. The guards outside heard her cry out, but when they rushed in, they stopped, because their queen was kneeling on the floor beside the human, her radiant form trembling, her hands covering her face. She was laughing and crying all at once. "You are impossible," she whispered, looking at him through tears. "No one should have been able to do that." He reached for her hand again, weakly but surely. "Maybe your kind forgets," he said softly. "We're built to listen, to survive, to love." And as her fingers intertwined with his, something inside her, something vast and ancient, finally broke free. She bent down and pressed her forehead to his. "Then hear this, Elias Crane," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "By my vow and my name, you are bound to me. The queen of the Zelari keeps her promises." "You don't have to," he whispered. "I want to," she answered. And for the first time in centuries, the stars outside the radiant crown burned brighter, as if the universe itself had stopped to listen to their song. The queen's chamber was silent, the kind of silence that carried weight, the kind that made the air itself feel sacred. Elias lay resting once more, his breathing steadier, his skin no longer pale with pain. His recovery was slow but sure. Yet the queen still sat near him each night, watching the rhythm of his chest rise and fall as if the universe itself depended on it. Outside the great windows, the stars of Veilguard shimmered distant, endless, and unknowable. But inside, everything felt fragile, too close, too real. Queen Sareth had faced 1,000 wars, and not once had she cried. But this man, this small, stubborn human, had undone her with a whisper, with a single truth that no other being in the galaxy had ever known. He had spoken her name. Not through power, not through command, through understanding. That name was sacred, a vibration known only to her and the stars that had birthed her. And yet when he said it, it didn't feel like theft. It felt like being found. Now she understood something she had never dared to before, that strength did not always roar. Sometimes it came quietly, through listening, through love. When Elias awoke again, the queen was standing at the window. Her reflection glowed softly in the glass, her form a silhouette of silver and blue light. He stirred, voice rough. "You don't sleep much, do you?" She turned, a faint smile touching her lips. "Rulers rarely do." "Or people who care too much," he said softly. She tilted her head. "You think I care for you, human." He met her gaze, calm and steady. "I don't think I know." Her laugh was quiet, almost shy. "You are fearless." "Only when it matters." She walked closer, her steps light and graceful. When she stopped beside his bed, her glow cast soft light over his face. "You changed my world, Elias Crane," she said. "You changed me." He smiled faintly. "Guess I'm good at repairs." But her expression did not lighten. Her voice dropped to a whisper, heavy with emotion. "Do you know what you've done?" He blinked, confused. "Saved your ship." She shook her head. "No, you bound yourself to me." "Bound?" "When you touched the psionic core, when you entered the song, you tied your soul to mine. That is why you survived. It is why you could hear my name. We are linked now in ways that even I cannot undo." Elias was silent for a long time. Then he said quietly, "Then I guess I'm staying." She looked at him sharply. "You don't understand. The link means you are part of me. When I feel, you will feel. When I die." "Then I'll die too," he finished. Her voice trembled. "You accept that so easily." He nodded. "I already did, the moment I touched that core." Something inside her broke at his calmness, that strange human peace in the face of impossible fate. She sat beside him, unable to speak for a while. The glow from her skin dimmed, the color fading to a soft silver. "You are impossible," she whispered. "You keep saying that," he replied with a grin. "Because it's true." Days passed. Word spread across the empire that the queen had chosen a consort, a human. It was scandal to some, miracle to others. Songs began to rise through the networks of the Zelari, retelling the story of the fragile being who had guessed the queen's name and survived the touch of her soul. But to the queen herself, there was no legend, only truth. At night, she and Elias would stand by the observation deck, watching the stars drift. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they said nothing at all. Once Elias asked, "When you were a child, did you ever imagine living like this, ruling the stars?" Sareth smiled faintly. "When I was young, I imagined peace, but the stars do not reward dreamers, they only test them." He looked out the window. "Maybe that's why we're here, to keep dreaming anyway." She turned to him, studying his face, the simple humanity of him, the tired eyes, the uneven smile, the stubborn warmth that seemed to burn brighter than any light she'd ever seen. And suddenly, she realized what scared her most. Not the bond between them, not the judgment of her empire, but the thought of losing him again. That night when he slept, she leaned close and whispered softly in her own tongue, a language older than the stars. It was her song name, the one only she had ever spoken before he guessed it. "My heart," she said, "you should not have been able to find me, but you did." Her tears shimmered as they fell onto his hand, liquid light fading as they touched his skin. "You once asked why we live so long," she murmured. "Now I think I know. It's to meet souls like yours, even if we only get to keep them for a little while." He stirred in his sleep, his fingers twitching slightly, and for a moment she felt his voice inside her mind, faint, half-dreamed. "I'm not going anywhere." Her breath caught. She smiled through her tears. "Then maybe," she whispered, "neither am I." Outside, the radiant crown drifted through the quiet dark, carrying with it a new kind of song, not of war or command, but of two souls bound together across the gulf of creation. And somewhere deep within the ship's heart, two melodies, one human, one alien, pulsed as one. The galaxy changed slowly, but word of the Queen and her humans spread like fire across the stars. Some called it madness, that the eternal Queen of the Zelari had bound herself to a creature who would die in the blink of an eye. Others called it prophecy, the joining of two destinies written long before either of them was born. But to those who had seen the Veilguard rift, who had heard the Queen's voice rise through the silence after the Devourers fell, it was something simpler. It was love. The radiant crown drifted once more through peaceful space. Its scars had healed, its song now strong and bright. Where once it had sung with the cold tones of command, it now carried warmth, a rhythm shaped by two souls instead of one. The crew said the ship itself had changed, that it hummed with human emotion now, laughter in its lights, heart in its hum. And in the queen's private chambers, that new song lived and breathed. Elia stood beside her, watching the nebula unfold beyond the glass. Great rivers of color swirled through the void, golds, blues, and reds mixing like paint across a living canvas. "It never gets old," he said softly. "No," Sareth replied. "The stars never age, only those who watch them do." He smiled faintly. "Then maybe we should keep watching together." She turned toward him, eyes glimmering. "You would make even eternity sound short, human." "Only because I know what short really feels like." The words made her chest tighten, a quiet ache she could no longer hide. For all the power in her veins, all the light in her being, she could not escape time. He would age. She would not. The bond between them tied their hearts, not their years. And yet she could not let go. Weeks later, the royal council gathered, the first meeting since the Veilguard victory. The chamber was vast, filled with Zelari nobles glowing like constellations. They bowed when the queen entered, but their voices were sharp when they spoke. "The bond with the human must end," said one. "His presence weakens your song." "It strengthens it," Sareth said coldly. "He will die," another hissed. "And when he does, he will take a piece of your essence with him. Can you risk that?" The queen's eyes flashed. "He already risked everything for me, for all of you. Do not speak of cost when none of you could pay what he has." The council fell silent beneath her fury. Her voice was not loud, but it carried the power of the stars themselves, a sound that burned through arrogance and fear alike. And though some still muttered against her choice, none dared challenge her again. Later, Elias found her alone in the gardens of the upper deck, a wide, open dome filled with glowing vines and pools of silver water. She stood by a tree that shimmered like crystal, her hands pressed to its bark. "They don't understand," he said quietly. "They don't have to," she replied. "They only need to obey." He walked closer. "That's not you talking." She turned, eyes fierce. "I am their queen." "You're more than that," he said gently. "You're Sareth, the woman who sang me back to life." The anger left her all at once. She sank to her knees beside the pool, her reflection flickering in the water, bright one moment, fading the next. "Elias," she whispered, "when you spoke my name, you changed something in me. You gave me back my heart. And now, every time I look at you, I feel the universe bending. I feel everything too much." He knelt beside her, his hand finding hers. "That's what it means to be human," he said softly. "To feel everything, even when it hurts." "You call that strength?" "Yeah," he said, "because it means we care enough to keep going." She looked into his eyes, and for the first time since she had taken her throne, she let herself be small, not a queen, not a god, just a woman in love with something mortal. And when she kissed him, the whole ship seemed to exhale. Years passed. The queen and her human became a story told in whispers and songs. The Zelari learned new words, laughter, warmth, kindness, words that had never existed in their tongue before. Some said the queen's song could now be heard beyond the empire's borders, resonating through space like a beacon. When Elias grew older, his steps slower, his hair touched with silver, the queen never left his side. She walked with him through the gardens, through the starfields, through the silent halls where the two of them had once been strangers. And on the last night of his life, when the stars burned low beyond the glass, she sang for him not the song of a ruler, but the song of a soul. It was her true name again, the melody he had once guessed. But this time she wove his name into it too. Two songs, two hearts, one sound. He smiled as he listened, his eyes closing, his breath soft. "You always sang beautifully," he whispered. "Only because you listened," she said, her tears glowing as they fell onto his skin. When he took his final breath, the song did not stop. The ship's light grew brighter, spreading across the sky in a slow, gentle wave, carrying both their names together into the endless dark. 1,000 years later, Zelari children would still look to the stars and speak of them, the queen who sang with a human, and the man who heard the universe itself. Their voices would echo the same promise, taught from that day forward. No being is too small to touch the stars, and no heart is too strange to be understood. And deep in the endless night, where the radiant crown still sailed on its eternal path, a quiet hum lingered, the sound of a queen's song and a human voice forever entwined. A reminder that love, once spoken, never fades. It only changes form from breath to light to music.